the early hours of May 25, 1996, Kristen Smart disappeared. She was last seen around 2 a.m., reportedly intoxicated and passed out on a neighbor's lawn. Two fellow students stopped to help, concerned about her condition. Paul Flores, who lived closest to her Muir Hall residence, also offered assistance. She was never seen again. For over 2 decades, Kristen's case remained unsolved, though Flores's name repeatedly surfaced in investigations. Despite various items of interest, no definitive leads emerged. Her disappearance led to legislative changes aimed at improving student safety. Kristen Denise Smart was born on February 20, 1977, in Augsburg, Bavaria, West Germany. Her parents, Stan and Denise Smart, were teachers for children of American military personnel. The family later moved to Stockton, California, when she was still young. The eldest of 3 children, Kristen was described by her mother as a dreamer with a deep love for the ocean and an adventurous spirit. Known for her zest for life, Kristen graduated from Lincoln High School in Stockton in 1995. Before starting university, she worked as a lifeguard and camp counselor at Kaimokulea in Hawaii. In 1996, she began her studies at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, California, with ambitious dreams but struggled with indecision about her future. Initially, Kristen enrolled at Cal Poly to study architecture. She loved drawing. Later, she changed her major to communication studies. Denise said she wanted to be the next Joan London, traveling the world as a reporter. Memorial Day weekend 1996, Kristen called home and left a voicemail. "Good news. Good news. I'll call home Sunday." The call never came. Like clockwork, Kristen checked in with her family every Sunday, but for the Smarts, all communication ceased that faithful weekend. Friday night, Kristen attended an off-campus birthday party. Her friend, Margarita Campos, recalled dropping her off. Campos said that Kristen seemed a little mad because she didn't join her for the evening. The last thing she said to Kristen was to be careful. Temperatures were warm, and Kristen wore a cropped gray t-shirt, black surf shorts, and red Puma sneakers. Witness statements from the party varied. Some alleged she was extremely intoxicated. Others claimed she didn't drink at all. Some believed she was possibly given a date rape drug. On May 25, 1996, at 2 a.m., fellow student Tim Davis spotted Kristen passed out on the lawn next door. Together with Cheryl Anderson, an acquaintance of Kristen, they both helped her walk back to her campus dorm, Muir Hall. It was then Paul Flores reached the group and offered to help take Kristen back to the residence. He was leaving the party too and spotted them on his way back to his own dorm, Santa Lucia Hall. Once all 3 reached the Cal Poly campus, Davis left the group since he lived off campus. Now down to 3, Cheryl started to notice Paul's odd behavior. In her disposition, Cheryl remarked about the many stops made along the way. She also noted the familiar manner Paul had with Kristen. He held her around the waist as Kristen wrapped her arms around his neck. Paul even suggested that Cheryl go ahead as they tried to catch up. Cheryl eventually went her own way, but not before double-checking with Paul about ensuring Kristen's safe return. Paul claimed he walked Kristen to the intersection of the hallways that led off to both their respective residence halls. This was around 2:30 a.m. on May 25, 1996. Kristen Smart has never been seen or heard from since then. When Sunday rolled around without a call from Kristen, Denise didn't grow immediately concerned. With Monday being a holiday, anything could have come up. Kristen's roommate, a neighbor, however, found it unusual. They contacted the university police department to report Kristen missing. No report was taken. Concerned, they called Kristen's family and the San Luis Obispo Police Department. On May 27, 1996, Denise received a call from the UPD asking if Kristen had returned home for the weekend. She hadn't. The UPD only filed the missing persons report 3 days after her last sighting. Kristen's roommate, Crystal Calvin, revealed that none of her personal belongings were missing. This suggested to authorities that days after Kristen went missing, Paul was interviewed by the UPD investigators. He told investigators they both went their own directions at the intersection. Investigators, however, were quick to notice Paul's black eye. When asked about it, Paul said he was elbowed in the face during a basketball game. A friend later refuted this story. He insisted that the black eye was there before the basketball game. Paul allegedly told him he didn't know how he got the black eye, he just woke up with it. A month later in June, Paul was interviewed again, this time confessing he lied about the black eye incident. Paul changed his story. He apparently hit his eye on the steering wheel of a truck. When questioned further, Paul said that the story sounded unlikely. Paul told investigators he was in his truck at around 2 a.m. on the morning of May 27, 1996, installing a car radio because he was selling his truck. Family lawyer for the Smarts, James R. Murphy Jr., said Paul was last seen with Kristen after the party. His injuries looked consistent with those of someone involved in an altercation. Cadaver dogs were called in to assist in the search for Kristen on June 29, 1996. For dogs trained to search for human remains were used individually to search Santa Lucia Hall. Each dog alerted to room 128, Paul Flores's room. The dog showed no interest apart from the corner of one mattress, a mattress Flores told investigators belonged to him. Carta dog handler, Adela Morris, said cadaver dogs can detect the slightest physiological changes. Their reactions during the search indicated a strong possibility of a dead body being in room 128. A second handler, Gail LaRock, recalled the behavior of her boxer, Tori. When allowed to search, Tori repeatedly searched the left side of room 128, the side used by Paul Flores. The dog's behavior and strong reaction indicated she found a scent, but was still searching for its source. Paul Flores remained the strongest suspect. Nobody meant no formal charge. Paul went on to live his life as a free man shrouded in a cloak of suspicion. From 1996 through 2007, investigations continued. Searches were conducted in all possible locations, including 4 properties owned by the Flores family. None of them yielded any positive results. On the advice of his lawyer, Paul Flores pleaded the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution protects individuals from incriminating themselves. The person who invokes this clause cannot be compelled to provide information that they feel could incriminate them further. Paul, therefore, had the right to remain silent during his 1997 deposition. Attorney James R. Murphy hit a brick wall. Paul's silence and refusal to cooperate left investigators scrambling for new leads. Although all evidence left back to Paul, former Sheriff Ed Williams himself said he saw no way of completing the case. Authorities were getting frustrated. The Smarts took it upon themselves to file a wrongful death charge. The court, however, decided against proceeding with the charges. Kristen's case was still an active criminal investigation. Paul and his Kristen Smart or the accusations against them. Although Derek C., one of Paul's roommates, said Paul allegedly joked about Kristen's disappearance, these allegations remain speculation as Paul shielded himself against further questioning by lawyering up. 6 years after going missing on May 25, 2002, with no remains having been found, Denise Smart confessed it was a bittersweet moment of closure. Then Chris Lambert broke the silence. Chris was 8 years old when Kristen went missing. Haunted by the ever-looming billboard over Arroyo Grande, Chris found himself asking why there were still no answers all these years later. Hearing about Kristen's disappearance at a young age frightened him. Chris became fixated by the case. In May 2018, he quit his job at a musical instrument shop to work on the podcast full-time. With no formal training in law or journalism, he was driven only by a passion for answers. He began asking questions to see if he could get people talking. In 2019, Chris' determination paid off. He decided to visit the memorial to Kristen on Shell Beach on her birthday, February 20th, armed with a cell phone. Chris waited to meet someone willing to talk about Kristen. As luck would have it, he ran into Kristen's mom there and was able to talk with her about her daughter. From there on, Chris and the Smarts developed a strong relationship and worked on getting Kristen's story out to the public. The podcast, In Your Own Backyard, took on a life of its own. What started as a local series exploded onto the national scene. To date, it has raked in over 11 million downloads. The podcast follows the case of Kristen Smart and her disappearance from the Cal Poly campus. Chris had a knack for getting people to talk to him. He was able to obtain interviews with people related to the case to varying degrees. Chris searched for witnesses that were reluctant to speak or overlooked by investigators. He was able to uncover multiple allegations that remained mere speculations over the years. A former colleague of Paul's mother, Susan, claimed she complained about not sleeping well after her husband got a call in the middle of the night during the Memorial Day weekend. He left in his car after the call. Another claim came from one of Susan's tenants. This time, the tenant told Chris that every morning after Kristen's disappearance at 4:20 a.m., an alarm would go off from the area of the backyard. A third interview with an Australian exchange student brought to the forefront a possible altercation between Kristen and Paul. According to Chris, the student alleged to have seen Kristen fighting off Paul on the night she disappeared. In an effort to tie up all of the speculations made by people interviewed by Chris, certain theories were highlighted. The first being that Paul got a black eye during a tussle with Kristen. The second, that Paul's father, Ruben Flores, helped cover up the crime. And the third, that the body of Kristen Smart was buried in the backyard of the Flores home. Another disturbing development in his investigation was that Chris uncovered allegations of gross misconduct by Paul over the years. Women who went to school or worked with Paul reported his overly flirtatious behavior and excessive drinking habits. For women approached the Daily Beast, alleging Paul had sexually or physically assaulted them. An ex-girlfriend even went as far as to claim that Paul brandished a butter knife in her face during a fight. 13 more women had accusations leveled against Paul, including predatory behavior, harassment, and sexual assault. Although Chris has made 2 attempts to contact Paul, he had no success. He figured an interview could tie up loose ends, but more importantly, it would give Paul a chance to explain the allegations against him and give his side of the story. However, he refutes the claim that Chris tried making contact with her family. Susan stated she could shoot plenty of holes into Chris's investigation. Sheriff Ian Parkinson of the San Luis Obispo Sheriff's Department credits Chris for helping move the investigation forward. Parkinson commended Chris on putting together a well-done podcast. He said getting the story out there persuaded people to come forward, the value of which has been a game changer. Denise Smart also credited Chris, saying, "The stars aligned when the podcast aired." Denise further thanked Parkinson for putting vigor back into the case of Kristen since taking office in 2011. Despite the continued silence of the Flores family, the investigations along with the podcast shook their precarious foundation. On January 29, 2020, 2 trucks owned by Paul were taken into evidence. On February 5th that same year, search warrants for specific items of evidence were issued for 4 different locations. This included a home in Los Angeles. Paul was briefly detained while the search was carried out. By April 22, 2020, the Los Angeles Times reported that a search warrant was served at the home of Paul Flores in San Pedro, California. Items of interest were successfully retrieved during the search, including date rape drugs and videos of Paul sexually assaulting young women. Paul was then arrested on February 11, 2021 in Ranchos Palos Verdes, California on suspicion of being a felon in possession of a firearm. In March of the same year, a search warrant was issued for the home of Paul's father, Ruben Flores, using cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar to carry out the property search. An older model Volkswagen was towed away for evidence after a search conducted by the dogs. On April 13th, Paul and his father Ruben were taken into custody by San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Department in relation to Kristen's case. Paul was charged with murder and Ruben with being an accessory after the fact. Paul may have gotten away with a charge of sexual assault due to the statute of limitations, but murder committed during a rape or attempted rape still carries a first-degree felony murder charge. In September 2021, a judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence for the case to proceed to trial. Set to begin in April 2022, the trial was delayed and moved to Monterey County. The trial began on July 18, 2022. Paul and Ruben are being tried separately with 2 different sets of jurors, but at the same time. Opening statements made by San Luis Obispo County Deputy District Attorney Chris Pavel painted a picture of a young life lost too soon. Pavel described to the jurors a family mourning their daughter's unknown whereabouts and the evil that is Paul Flores. He added that evidence found at his father Ruben's house suggested both men were responsible for the death and subsequent disposal of Kristen's body. Paul's defense attorney, Robert Sanger, called that evidence into question. He said it was a tragic situation, that Kristen's body was never found, nor was any DNA evidence. He stated it is believed she is deceased, but there is no evidence of what happened to her after Paul left her at her dorm. Since July, the trial has seen accusations of predatory behavior and violence leveled against Paul Flores. Many women have come forward accusing Paul of harassment and inappropriate sexual misconduct. 2 women who were referred to as Rhonda Doe and Sarah Doe gave testimony of their encounters with Paul. Both women alleged they felt uncharacteristically drunk after meeting Paul. Large chunks of their memories were lost, and both described waking up to Paul abusing them. Their graphic testimonies brought jurors to tears, prompting Judge Jennifer O'Keefe to call for a recess. Testimony surrounding the search of Ruben Flores' home caused another juror to break down. With testimony from investigators and experts, many graphic details are being recounted. Judge O'Keefe stated that it was a long, hard trial, and sometimes things are emotional. It was not unusual for jurors to break down emotionally. Damning evidence came in the form of one Jennifer Hudson. Hudson took to the stand explaining how she encountered Paul and his friends while skateboarding. She was 17 years old at the time. Previous court papers stated that Hudson alleged Paul remarked he had buried Kristen beneath his ramp in his backyard in Hawasna. This was allegedly said while they were together during a public service announcement of Kristen's disappearance. Sanger, defense attorney for Paul, questioned the relevance of her statements. He pointed out her recreational use of drugs and alcohol, questioning her reliability. He implied she was not answering truthfully according to a transcript of her tweets. Hudson acknowledged her lack of action in notifying police. She said she only came forward after the podcast was aired. She further admitted that she canceled an interview with a detective after meeting the producer of the podcast in 2019. Sanger further questioned Hudson on whether she thought Kristen Smart was buried in Susan Flores' backyard. She reportedly responded that made the most sense. When Sanger pursued that Hudson had affiliations with motorcycle gang members, the line of questioning was objected to by prosecutors, the judge siding with the prosecution. During a cross-examination by Peril, he asked Hudson to explain a previous statement in which she said she felt responsible for the Misery Smart family. Hudson responded by stating that had she not been a coward, she would have come forward earlier. After her testimony, Hudson reportedly broke down in tears. Unexpectedly, court proceedings were halted after Hudson's testimony. No reason given by the judge. The trial is expected to continue through September 2022. For the Smart family, an emotional decades-long search for the truth is finally coming to an end, yet their heartbreak over losing their daughter never will. Where other victims of Paul Flores' old wounds are being reopened, for Chris Lambert, the quest for justice has finally begun. Kristen Smart can finally rest at peace as her killer may soon be held accountable. No longer just a face on a billboard, Kristen's story is being laid bare for all to hear and for all to share in the triumph and relief of seeing her killer face his just dues. The case of Sheila LaBar is one of a seemingly angelic appearance masking a monstrous nature. Early psychological and physical traumas can have unpredictable effects on an individual's life. While not everyone who experiences such hardships becomes cruel or seeks to harm others, sometimes trauma can give rise to a true monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Raine, in his book Anatomy of Violence, explores how genetic and psychophysical factors can contribute to turning someone into a cold-blooded killer. History is filled with serial criminals who endured hellish childhoods, and Sheila LaBar may well be one of them. LaBar possessed an angelic appearance, which she used to lure her victims, seducing them before brutally murdering them. While the court was only able to convict her for 2 crimes, criminologists suspect there were many more. Let's delve into this troubling story and try to determine whether Sheila LaBar was born a monster or became one due to the cruelty she endured in her childhood. Sheila LaBar was born on July 4, 1958, in the small rural town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents and was raised with her brother and sister Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque, but rather secluded place on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive, and open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance. So perhaps, if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father. The head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour or frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, when Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter Sheila in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel from an early age forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to conquer the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer. And she had everything for this: charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice. Adulthood, first marriage. Verily, Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents' home, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score. And to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a slender figure and a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time, she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, LaBar then Bailey met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon, the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them, but all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months until in the early 80s, she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, Sheila demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to the relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad, and he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon, Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and possibly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home but began to behave not just aggressively but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal, she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors, Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the mad woman. Rich lover. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners both in intimate and everyday life. Soon the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill LaBar. The man had previously been married twice and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Epping, New Hampshire, and on the ranch, he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him a postal mail frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon LaBar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a marriage proposal, changed her name, calling herself LaBar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch. But soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that from now on he would be the couple continued their relationship online. Sherry sent photos of ultrasounds and her growing belly. "I just bulged out my belly. Jerry wanted to believe it so badly that I had no doubt. He would see the pregnancy even if it wasn't there," Miller would later say. Soon, on November 5, 1999, Jerry Cassidy received an email, presumably from Bruce Miller, in which he wrote that he knew about everything and would not let the bastards be born. A concerned Jerry tried to contact Jerry. Hours later, she texted him herself, informing him that she had to leave for a few days and that she would text him later. The next day, Jerry received a message from Bruce and learned that he had forced his wife to have an abortion. Attached to the letter were photos of a battered Sherry. "I remember standing in front of the mirror trying to draw bruises on my stomach." Sherry would later recount. Jerry had reached a tipping point. His children, not one but two twins at once, had been killed by Bruce Miller. He was again devastated and full of anger. He blamed Bruce for the deaths of his 3 children and the abuse of the woman he loved. After reconnecting with Sherry the next day, November 8th, Jerry said he couldn't go on like this. He would kill her husband. The couple set about devising a plan to kill him. They worked out routes, parking spots, and even the best place and time to get to the dump. Jerry then made the long drive from his home to Michigan. That same evening, as Bruce planned to leave work, he received a call from Sherry and, following the plan, asked if he could pick up a pizza on his way home. Distracted by the conversation, Bruce did not notice a man approaching him from behind, pointing his 20-gauge shotgun at him and pulling the trigger. After committing the crime, Jerry went home and Sherry began the next part of the plan. She called Bruce's brother, Chuck, said she was very worried about her husband's long absence, and asked Chuck to drive to the junkyard and see if everything was okay. When Chuck got there, he found his brother dead on the floor in a pool of blood. He had been shot in the chest with a shotgun at close range. According to eyewitnesses, when Sherry learned of Bruce's death, she began screaming and crying. The crime scene was quickly discovered, but no trace or evidence of the suspect remained. Detectives learned that Bruce carried large amounts of cash, and they initially thought his death may have been the result of a botched robbery as the dead man's wallet was missing. John Hutchinson, a friend and employee of Bruce's who had recently borrowed $2,000 from him, came under suspicion. Police questioned Hutchinson, searched his home, and confiscated weapons. John adamantly denied involvement. The search was inconclusive, and despite the fact that Hutchinson failed a polygraph test, he was eventually released. A theory of murder due to falsification of vehicle identification numbers was considered. However, none of the options did not give any leads, and soon the case was closed. Meanwhile, according to Bruce's sister, Judy Miller, Sherry's behavior did not fit most people's idea of a grieving spouse. 2 days after the death of her supposedly beloved husband, she was already dancing in a bar in Otisville, Michigan, and looked happy. 2 weeks later, she had a boyfriend, and it wasn't Jerry Cassidy, but a local delivery boy named Jeff Foster. The goal was accomplished. It was like Sherry had passed a level in a video game, and the former lover was no longer interesting. Jerry thought that after the murder, he would be with the woman he loved. After all, he killed for her. But that didn't happen. She began to distance herself, and a month after the murder, she moved her new boyfriend, Jeff Foster, into the house she used to share with her husband and completely severed her relationship with Jerry, leaving him devastated. It was probably at this point that Cassidy realized he had murdered an innocent man in cold blood, and naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking. She became an operator of intimate phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny County, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. However, he had a low IQ level due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy LaBar was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon, Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time, intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks, but he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera, and later, this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin, there were huge bruises under his eye and on his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled and even frightened by the guy's appearance that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time, Sheila managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon, Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether, and when his worried mother arrived at LaBar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evident, Sheila provided an audio recording in which he asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find LaBar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange and were made of improvised materials, a mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts, reporting all the findings, but that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny, and I remember hearing her scream, "No, Mommy, no, don't go." After that moment, the full implications of what I had done to Bruce, his friends, his family, Jerry, his friends, and his family hit me with full force. They will never see them again. Bruce was a great man, Sherry Miller wrote of her husband. He never hurt me or my children. All he did was love us. He wanted to adopt my children. He just wanted a family, the only man who loved me, and I ordered him killed. In 2022, Sherry gave a public interview to a popular TV station. She admitted that Bruce was not involved with the mob and never abused her. She admitted that she used makeup to fake bruises and faked ultrasound scans to manipulate Jerry. According to Sherry, she didn't do it for the money. She said that she was afraid Bruce would find out who she really was and felt that it would be easier for him to be killed than to learn the truth about her. Sherry admitted that she knew about Jerry's tendency toward depression and the briefcase of evidence, but was confident that she would talk herself out of anything and could manipulate the jury and the court. She was so convinced of this that she turned down a plea bargain that could have gotten her 15 years instead of a life sentence. According to Sherry, it took a public story to find peace with herself. It's still very hard for me to look in the mirror realizing what I did. I've been waiting to tell the truth and hopefully get a sense of peace from it. Sherry Miller remains incarcerated at the Huron Valley Women's Complex in Michigan. She is not eligible for parole. Who, in one voice, called her a crazy, unstable, and extremely violent woman. And Wayne Annis, the 3rd husband, said that the ex-wife repeatedly persuaded him to kill Mr. LaBar in order to seize his property. But despite the defense's attempts to convince the court that Sheila was insane and in need of treatment, it was proven that she was aware of her actions at the time of her crimes. She was found guilty in July 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released. All of her appeals were rejected. Sheila is now serving her sentence in Florida at Homestead Correctional Facility. Thanks for watching, guys. That was Jack. Subscribe to the channel and don't forget to click on the bell not to miss new stories. Hello. See you soon. Take care. But he's not a murderer. During the final sentencing, excitement gripped the Eckerd parents. Judge Anthony imposed a sentence of 50 years in prison without parole. The parents were broken. One miserable day had taken 2 sons from them at once. The cold-blooded murder of an innocent man and even a brother is clearly beyond the bounds of adequate human response. In the biblical story, the brother killer Cain was banished from paradise as punishment, but he solved the problem differently, eliminating the source of his remorse. In the summer of 2003, the body of 36-year-old Sabrina Payne was discovered in a field near Tremont, Illinois. Sabrina, a black woman, was known to support a drug habit through prostitution. She had been last seen at her home 2 days before her body was found. The initial autopsy failed to determine a clear cause of death, leading some detectives to believe she may have overdosed. However, one detective was uneasy about this theory. As time went on, his suspicions were confirmed. Over the next year, more bodies were discovered in Peoria and Tazewell counties. On February 5, 2004, 36-year-old Barbara Williams' body was found in a ditch near Edwards, Illinois. She was partially clothed and lying face down in the snow. Barbara had been seen alive the previous evening between 9 and 10 p.m. An autopsy revealed multiple contusions and abrasions on her body, and toxicology tests showed fatal levels of cocaine in her system. Despite this, police were hesitant to label her death as murder, nor were they ready to entertain the possibility of a serial killer targeting Black, drug-addicted prostitutes. In October 2004, 32-year-old Chiconda Thomas was reported missing. Last seen by her family in August, Chiconda had a history of disappearing, but when she failed to return after several weeks, her family filed a missing persons report. Shirley Entrap was also reported missing in the late summer of 2004. She was seen 3 days before she was reported missing. Tamara Walls was reported missing in September of 2004 after not being seen for 3 weeks. All 3 missing women were also Black females known to support a crack cocaine habit with prostitution. 36-year-old mother of 8, Laura Lawler, disappeared from her home after leaving with a man and woman. Her longtime partner searched for her, but only was able to determine she had been with a man named Larry. Her boyfriend and father to her 7 daughters and 1 son describes Laura as the love of his life and a beautiful soul. The two had experimented with crack cocaine, and Laura seemed to struggle with addiction before her disappearance. On September 25, 2004, Linda Neal was found on King Road in Tazewell County. She was found nude along the side of the road. Linda, like the other women, was known to be part of the drug scene in Peoria. At this point, police had determined there was likely a serial killer stalking Black females in the Peoria area. A task force was formed, which one detective states would have occurred much quicker if the victims had been white females. While police desperately searched for the killer, they kept a close eye on women in the community at risk. Despite their efforts, on October 15, 2004, Brenda Irving's body was found in a ditch near Farmington. Brenda was found nude, and an autopsy determined that she had been strangled and suffered blunt force trauma to her head. She also had fatal levels of cocaine in her system at the time of her death. Her children had feared for their mother's safety, as she had known many of the women who had been killed or disappeared from central Illinois. Brenda struggled with drug addiction. Despite detectives' best efforts, the case proved difficult to solve. They followed thousands of leads, but finally got the lead they were waiting for in December of 2004. 35-year-old Vicky Ballmer was arrested for theft. From jail, she told authorities that she thought she could help them find the serial killer preying on her fellow sex workers. She believed that a man who had picked her up in July 2004 was responsible. Ballmer explained that in July, a man named Larry Bright lured her to his mother's home while they shared alcohol and drugs. Once she was intoxicated, she said Bright attacked her, attempted to rape her, and pulled a knife on her. Somehow, Ballmer was able to escape. Police were at first skeptical as Ballmer asked for a plea deal in exchange for her testimony. Why hadn't she reported this back in July? Why wait until she was under arrest? Vicky Ballmer claimed she was scared of being arrested for outstanding warrants, which is why she did not come forward in July 2004. A search of her criminal history confirmed the warrants, so detectives decided to take a look at the man named Larry Bright. Larry Dean Bright was born in Peoria, Illinois on July 8, 1966. He served a 2-year stint in prison at age 19 for burglary and carjacking. According to Larry's family, the time Larry spent in prison changed him for the worse. Larry became more angry and violent and began using drugs. Larry had an injury, which started in addiction to prescription opioids and later crack cocaine. He also developed an addiction to pornography, preferring videos with Black women. Larry lived with his mother in a tiny guest house behind her home. Larry enjoyed gardening, creating a beautiful garden bed of flowers for his mother. When the police arrived at Larry's home following the tip, they noticed the beautiful flowers in the garden. Larry was placed under arrest for the unlawful restraint of Vicky. They questioned Larry about the murders, but he denied having any information about the murdered and missing women. Throughout the interview, Larry smoked several cigarettes. Detectives planned to take one of the cigarette butts and test it for DNA, but Larry ate them before leaving the interrogation room. Larry declined to give DNA voluntarily. Police searched Larry Bright's home on January 20th, 2005. The investigators dug up the garden, finding several small bone fragments and ashes that were later determined to be human. When the police questioned Larry again, they told him they were digging up his mother's flowers. At this point, Larry broke down and confessed to multiple murders. He even led investigators to the remains of some of his victims. Larry explained that around July 27, 2003, he picked up Sabrina Payne on the south side of Peoria. He drove her to his home, which he shared with his mother. He claimed the two drank and used cocaine before having consensual sex. Larry said he did not intend to tell Sabrina, but he became enraged thinking Sabrina was trying to rip him off. He strangled her to death and dumped her body near the cornfield where she was found. Larry confessed to picking up Barbara Williams in February 2004. Again, he used drugs and alcohol with his victim. He stated that he once again lost control of his anger and killed Barbara. He claimed he caught Barbara stealing from him. He dumped her body along the road where she was found the next day. The prosecution believed that after the first two murders, Larry developed a bloodlust. At the time of his arrest, he said, "I knew them, I would kill the others I would pick up. I went out hunting." Larry also confessed to killing Laura Lawyer. He burned her body in his backyard burn pit, burying the remains in his mother's yard. He said he wanted to destroy the bodies to avoid getting caught. He confessed to killing Tamara Walls and burning her remains. Her jawbone was found in the backyard. He admitted to strangling, beating, and burning Shirley and Trapp. Shakonda Thomas had the same fate after being picked up by Larry Bright. He burned the woman and buried the ashes in the yard. Because of his attempts to cremate his victims, he was nicknamed the Bone Crusher. Larry said that he attempted to burn Linda Neal and Brenda Irving as well, but the attempts were unsuccessful due to the weather. He dumped both women along the side of the road. Larry was facing the death penalty following his January 2005 arrest. In an attempt to spare his mother the embarrassment of a trial and avoid the death penalty, Larry Bright pleaded guilty to 7 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of drug-induced homicide on May 30, 2006. Bright's murders were not considered racially motivated, but detectives believe he was just attracted to black women. He is one of the very few serial killers who chooses victims outside of his race. Larry was sentenced to 7 life sentences without the possibility of parole to be served concurrently. He was also given an additional 30 years for the drug-induced homicide. As part of the plea deal, Larry will be required to serve 100% of his sentence with no parole consideration. Larry is currently housed at the Shawnee Correctional Center in Vienna, Illinois. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars, but that brings little peace to the families of his victims. The loved ones of Larry's victims want people to know that the women he killed were more than just drug addicts or prostitutes. They were people. They were mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. The serial killer dentist of St. Louis, Clennon Engelman. Dr. Clennon Engelman was born on February 6, 1927 in St. Louis, Missouri. Dr. Engelman grew up on the south side of the city and felt a deep connection to his neighborhood. After serving in the military, Dr. Engelman used his GI Bill to go to Washington University and become a dentist. He opened his dental office on the south side of St. Louis, serving the community he had always loved. Dr. Engelman, who went by Glenn, was married to a woman named Edna Ruth, but they divorced in 1956. By 1958, both Glenn and Ruth had remarried. Glenn was operating his dental office and appeared to be successfully serving the St. Louis community. On December 17, 1958, citizens in Forest Park noticed a bloody man stumbling. The man, James Stanley Bullock, soon passed from his injuries. These injuries were caused by a gunshot. No one could figure out why someone would shoot 28-year-old James Bullock. James Bullock was born on April 17, 1931 in DeSoto. He was raised in Shiloh, Illinois by his grandparents and later his aunt after his parents passed away. According to an article from 1938, the then 7-year-old was living with his grandparents in 1938 and enjoyed attending school and fishing. James later served in the military before returning to St. Louis to work and go to college. Back in St. Louis, James met Edna Ruth, the ex-wife of Dr. Glenn Engelman. The two married, and 6 short months later, James was dead. An employee at a local sanitarium initially claimed James was there 4 days before his murder, asking to be admitted because he feared for his life. His wife and aunt said this was not true, as the three had dinner together on that night. According to his widow and aunt, James was not afraid for his life, and they knew no one who would want him dead. However, Edna Ruth benefited greatly from her husband's death. Ruth had life insurance policies totaling $64,088. While under questioning, Edna Ruth made several weird statements, including telling the police she was married before, but her husband did not know. Who was she married to? Her husband's dentist, Dr. Glenn Engelman. Edna Ruth had lied to James and his family and lied on the marriage application about being married before. Police questioned a local career criminal who was out on parole for an assault at the time of the shooting. They weren't able to tie him to the murder of James, but they did note he lived near Dr. Engelman's office. Dr. Engelman and Edna Ruth both refused to take a polygraph test and denied any involvement in the murder of James Bullock. Dr. Engelman's new wife, Ida, refused to be questioned by the police. A patient provided an alibi for Dr. Engelman. However, another witness said that they tried to find someone at the office around the time when the office was empty. Edna Ruth invested part of the funds she received after becoming a widow and a doctor. Been bored being a dentist, so he often ventured into other areas of business. This included buying a trike strip along with a partner, Eric Fry. Dr. Engelman had grown to be close friends with Eric and his wife Sandy. On September 26, 1963, Eric and Dr. Engelman were at the trike strip using dynamite to explode and then fill abandoned cisterns on the property. Eric was lying on his stomach near one of the cisterns when the dynamite exploded quicker than anticipated. Eric was killed instantly and found lying in the bottom of the cistern. Coroner H.D. Steinbeck ruled the death accidental. Mr. Frey's wife had an insurance policy on her husband, which she invested part of into Dr. Engelman's practice. Dr. Engelman divorced Ida and married his third wife, Ruth, in 1967. The couple shared a son, but Ruth heeded the close relationship her husband had with a young woman who worked in his office named Carmen Miranda. Dr. Engelman offered to train Carmen to be a dental assistant in his office. Edna felt uncomfortable with the flirting between the doctor and his young assistant. Dr. Engelman, however, claimed he was trying to help people in his community. He hired Carmen's brother, Nick, as well at one point. Ruth was relieved when Carmen met a married man named Peter Home. Just a few months later, however, Carmen and Eric were walking in a rural area in Pacific, Missouri. The couple were exploring an area known to have caves and scenic paths. A shot suddenly fired, hitting Peter in the head. Peter died instantly and a hysterically Carmen flied down the help. Nearby, police found an X on a tree made with tape. The area was familiar to locals as a hunting area, and police believed that the shot was accidental. Police believed someone was target shooting at the axe and accidentally struck Mr. Home. Carmen had a significant amount of life insurance on her husband, totaling $60,000. This is equivalent to around $300,000 in 2024. Dr. Engelman and Ruth divorced soon after, at which time Dr. Engelman married young Carmen, whom he had known since she was a small child. His son lived with Edna, his ex-wife. Despite being married to Carmen, Dr. Engelman and Ruth still met regularly for sex. Dr. Engelman consuming had extramarital affairs, which included previous affairs with Carmen, Ruth, and even Sandy Fry, the wife of his business associate Eric Fry, who was killed by dynamite. Another of Dr. Engelman's affairs was with a patient named Barbara Boyle. On November 3, 1977, someone pretending to be from the farm girl walked up to the farmhouse owned by Arthur and Vernita Giswell in Edwardsville, Illinois. Soon after entering the home, the elderly couple were attacked and both were shot in the head. The wealthy couple left $340,000 to their son, Ronald Caswell. Guess who Ronald Caswell was married to? Barbara Boyle. On April 4, 1979, less than 2 years after the murder of his parents, Ronald Geiswold was found dead inside his car outside a hotel in East St. Louis, Illinois. The man had been beaten and shot to death. He had been missing for 4 days when his body was found. Following her husband's murder, Barbara collected his inheritance in addition to several life insurance policies. The equivalent sum of money today would be nearly $1,700,000. Guess who she cut to? Dr. Clinton Engelman. Following the murder of Marmal Geiswell, authorities were starting to notice the trend of connected deaths to Dr. Engelman. His patients and community, however, only saw a generous man committed to helping his community and its citizens. Dr. Engelman was not the greatest dentist, however. He often did a sloppy job of making casts for dentures and dental appliances, requiring the work to have to be redone by the dental lab several times. His business was struggling, however, and he soon found himself in debt with a dental lab owned by Sophie Barrera. Sophie Barrera owned the South St. Louis Dental Laboratory and had grown tired of waiting for Dr. Engelman to pay up by 1980. She filed a lawsuit against the doctor that was set to go to court just a few days after Sophie was murdered. On January 14, 1980, Sophie entered her vehicle in South St. Louis. Shortly after, the vehicle exploded. Police found remnants of a bomb under her car vehicle. Sophie had told her son before she was in fear of being killed. She believed Dr. Glenn Engelman was dangerous. Dr. Engelman was questioned for 3 hours and then released. Police were certain he was responsible for Sophie's death, but they had to prove it. The public also wondered if the bombing was related to another carried out between two mob families fighting for control over St. Louis labor unions. The evidence indicated, however, that this was not a mob hit. The number one suspect was the man who owed Sophie $15,000. Dr. Engelman had to be stopped, but the police weren't sure how to do it. Detectives soon began having conversations with Dr. Engelman's ex-wife and mother of his son, Ruth. Ruth told police nothing at first, but eventually started to talk. She explained that Dr. Engelman often bragged about killing people. He told her that he had a superpower he was able to kill without remorse. He had admitted to killing Eric Fry, Peter Home, and the Cuswell family. It was his side hustle, killing for profit. Ruth agreed to help the police, but none of her testimony could be used in court because Dr. Engelman confessed to her while the two were still married. He was protected by spousal privilege. Ruth decided to wear a wire, however, and met up with Dr. Engelman to exchange their son and sometimes just to socialize. They were still having a sexual relationship despite Dr. Engelman's marriage to Carmen. She tried to get Dr. Engelman to confess to her again by asking to write questions. He didn't seem to take the bait at first, and Ruth feared he would kill her next. Ruth suggested police plant a bug in her bedroom and she would invite the dentist over for sex. Dr. Engelman was suspicious, however, and did not say anything that could lead to his arrest. Ruth then met him at a diner wearing a wire, and this time he commented on being homicidally intimate with the widow of one of his victims. He admitted to the murders in great detail, providing just what police needed for an arrest. He explained that he found murder more sexually satisfying than sex. His ex-wife was given a new life in the witness protection program. Carmen, who was no longer married to the dentist, and her brother Nick were brought in for questioning to corroborate the allegations against Dr. Engelman. As possible co-conspirators, they asked for him were granted immunity to testify against the dentist. Carmen told quite the story. She said she was working for the dentist when he suggested she find someone with good benefits to marry. He told her about Eric Fry, whom he said he directed Sandy Fry to marry with all intentions of murdering the insurance proceeds. Soon after she was married, Carmen said Dr. Engelman told her where to go and made sure her husband was shot and killed. He staged it to look like a target shooting accident. Glennon Engelman was finally arrested and charged with murder in 1980. Carmen testified at Dr. Engelman's first trial, for which he was convicted of murdering Peter Hom and given 50 years in prison. The dentist then pleaded guilty to the murder of Sophie Barrera to avoid the death penalty. Serving a list sentence for that murder in Missouri, Dr. Engelman was back in court by 1985 in Illinois. In 1984, Robert Handy, a conduct and acquaintance of Dr. Engelman, admitted to authorities that he had taken part in the murder conspiracy of the Giswell family. He implicated Dr. Engelman, who had bludgeoned Harmeld Giswold and Shahim, as well as Ronald's widow, Barbara Boyle. Dr. Engelman was given 3 life sentences for the Giswold murders. He also was convicted of federal mail fraud and given a 30-year federal sentence. He is believed to have killed at least 12 people, including conspiring with his first wife to kill her husband, James Bullock, in 1958. Edna Ruth was never charged in the case due to lack of evidence. Barbara Boyle went on trial for the murder of her in-laws, Arthur and Vernita Giswell, and husband Ronald in 1985. The jury acquitted her of the murders of Arthur and Vernita by convicted her of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Ronald Giswell. Barbara Boyle was sentenced to 50 years in prison in 1985. She was granted parole in 2009. Dr. Engelman enjoyed his notoriety in Missouri, often comparing himself to legendary outlaw Jesse James. He is believed to have killed at least 12 people, but the actual number is unknown. Unlike other serial killers, Dr. Engelman was inspired, at least in part, by greed. He also seemed to revel in his ability to not feel remorse. Dr. Engelman died of diabetes-related health issues in 1999 at age 72. He was incarcerated in Jefferson City at the time. Adam Brundage, a 26-year-old father of 2 from Quakertown, Pennsylvania, was an avid reader and a loving pet owner with 2 cats. In early October 2004, Adam disappeared. The last confirmed sighting of him was at his workplace, an organic food warehouse in Milford Township, Pennsylvania, on October 1st. His ex-girlfriend, the mother of his children, reported him missing several days later. She told the police that although Adam was generally a private person who preferred staying home when not at work, it was unusual for him to be out of contact. She had been unable to reach him by phone, and when she went to check on him at his home, he was not there. Adam, typically a reliable employee, had also started missing shifts at work. The Quakertown police investigated his disappearance but were unable to follow up on any substantial leads by the end of November. The case remained unsolved until January 2020. On January 21st, Bucks County District Attorney Matthew Weintraub held a press conference to announce that Adam's case was solved. Unfortunately, Adam had gone missing because he had been killed in October of 2004. Authorities had located his remains, and his killer had already been arraigned in the case earlier that morning. Adam had been killed by someone who had been under suspicion ever since he went missing, his roommate Damon Smoot. Adam had purchased the town home he lived in using money he had inherited following his father's death, and had taken Smoot in as a roommate to offset the costs of home ownership. According to DA Weintraub, Smoot was jealous of Adam's possessions and essentially took over his life after killing him. After Adam went missing, Smoot continued living in Adam's house. He also began using all of Adam's belongings and driving Adam's maroon 1997 Mercury Cougar, which had been his prized possession. Smoot told Adam's stepmother that Adam had given him the house, the car, and his belongings, but could never provide any evidence or legal documents supporting this. He also gave various excuses for Adam's absence, saying that he was in states ranging from Wisconsin to West Virginia, for reasons ranging from needing cancer treatment to being in rehab to having a new job to running away from paying child support. In April of 2019, Adam's case was reopened, and authorities eventually found evidence, which has not been publicly specified, tying Smoot to his disappearance. On January 9, 2020, met with Smoot and his attorney in prison, where Smoot was serving a 5 to 10-year sentence for an unrelated assault to confront him with this evidence. At that time, Smoot, in the words of his attorney, chose to unburden his soul and confess to Adam's murder. In 2004, Smoot had been working as a heavy machine operator at the Haynes and Kibble House Quarry in Chalfont, Pennsylvania. Adam needed some sand to fix a grading issue on his property, and Smoot told him to meet him at the quarry after hours to buy some on October 4th. After Adam arrived at the quarry, the 2 men got into an argument. Smoot retrieved a baseball bat from his vehicle and used it to hit Adam in the back of the head with enough force to cave in his skull. This did not kill Adam immediately, however, so Smoot used his hands to cover Adam's nose and mouth until he stopped breathing. He then buried Adam's body in a berm in the quarry. Smoot provided authorities with the exact location where he had placed Adam's body in the quarry. Even with this specific information, in the help of a cadaver dog, it took a full day and night of excavating to remove all of the rock covering Adam's remains and recover them. If Smoot had not chosen to cooperate, Adam may never have been found, both because of how deeply he was buried and because investigators believed that Smoot had disposed of Adam somewhere on several acres of farmland he had access to and were planning on focusing their searches for Adam there instead of at the quarry. On January 21st, the morning of the press conference, Smoot was arraigned on one count of criminal homicide at Bucks County Courthouse. He waived his right to a preliminary hearing, and his bail was set at $1 million. Smoot's lawyers and the district attorney's office have reached an agreement, which has been approved by Adam's family, in which Smoot will plead guilty to third-degree murder and receive a sentence of 20 to 40 years in prison. 57-year-old Naomi Sanders lived alone in apartment 12 of the Oakwood Gardens Apartments in Vallejo, California. On February 26, 1973, she spoke with one of her friends at 8:30 p.m. She mentioned that she was about to cook her dinner. After hanging up the phone, she began cooking 2 steaks. It is believed that one was for her own dinner and the other was being prepared for her pet poodle Cindy. The steaks would still be on the stove, only half cooked, when another resident of the apartment complex entered Naomi's apartment the following day around 5 p.m. The neighbor found Naomi's partially nude body on her bed. Cindy the poodle was standing guard over her owner. Naomi's autopsy would later reveal that she had been raped and strangled. Naomi had no known enemies or scorned former boyfriends for police to investigate. She had been employed by the Brooks Security Service for 2 years, leaving her position there just 2 months before her death. Her former supervisor there, a retired police detective, volunteered to help with the investigation, but also said that Naomi had not received any threats while working for him. Naomi had left her job at Brooks after 6 months of trying to balance it with her second job. She worked as the building manager for her apartment complex and had a large cardboard sign with the word "open" written on it in her front window to inform passersby that there were apartments available in the complex and that she was available to discuss them. Potential new tenants would routinely come speak with Naomi about the complex, meaning her killer could have faint interest in living at Oakwood Gardens as a means of getting inside her apartment. Naomi's case went cold, and several decades would pass before authorities found new avenues of investigation. In 2014, Naomi's clothes were resubmitted to the California Department of Justice for testing. These tests revealed semen stains from which a DNA profile was developed. Unfortunately, there was no match to the profile in the Cody's database. In 2016, police tried to use familial DNA to identify Naomi's killer. They compared the DNA profile from the crime scene to offender databases first in California and later nationwide to see if a relative of the contributor of the DNA had committed a crime and therefore had their DNA profile on file. They did not find any such relatives. In 2018, detectives turned their attention to using genetic genealogy to solve the case. While they could not identify any relatives of the killer in offender databases, they still hoped that they could locate some in public genealogical databases. They partnered with Parabon Nanolabs. An analysis completed in April of 2019 identified 2 potential suspects. Detectives traveled to Louisiana, where they covertly obtained a DNA sample from one of these potential suspects from an item they observed him throwing away. Testing on the sample eliminated him as a suspect. Their other potential suspect was deceased and his remains had been cremated, leaving authorities without the opportunity to test his DNA directly. This man did have children, however. They visited one of his sons who lives outside of California, and he provided them with a sample of his DNA. On February 27, 2020, exactly 47 after Naomi's body was discovered, the Vallejo Police Department announced that they had identified her killer, Robert Dale Edwards. Edwards was 22 years old and living in Vallejo at the time of Naomi's murder. His father was a previous co-worker of hers. He could not be arrested for the crime because he had passed away from a drug overdose in Napa County, California in 1993. He had spent the 2 decades between Naomi's murder and his own death building an extensive criminal record, with charges ranging from assault to driving under the influence to attempted murder. Edwards was identified through his niece, 26-year-old Sophia Edwards, who had uploaded her DNA to the GED Match database. The young mother and in-home care provider living in Napa, California barely knew her father and was using the database to try to find out more about her family. The amount of DNA she shared with a profile generated from Naomi's clothing allowed investigators to focus in on her family tree. While Sophia never met her uncle, she did have old pictures of him and was shocked to see his face on the evening news, following his identification as Naomi's killer. Edward's son, who provided his DNA to police in order to confirm his father's involvement in Naomi's case, has not been publicly identified. His half-brother, however, has spoken publicly about the case. Robert Edwards is a 42-year-old married father who lives in Fairfield, California. He does not know his half-brother, who provided his DNA to police, and he did not know his father. His mother left his father when he was just a few months old because of his violent behavior, which she had viewed as a reaction to the time he had spent serving in the Vietnam War. While the younger Robert Edwards knew his father was not a good man, he was still shocked to learn of his involvement in Naomi's case. All this was shocking to me. I knew my dad was not a nice man after the war, but never thought he was a murderer or rapist, he told the Daily News. Naomi had no children of her own, but having 9 brothers and sisters, she has a large extended family. Following the announcement of the identification of Robert Dale Edwards as her killer, 2 of Naomi's nieces released a statement on behalf of their family. Many family members directly affected by the loss of Naomi have also passed, and unfortunately, they cannot be afforded the truth as to what happened, they wrote. Those of us who do remember the stories of Naomi's life and untimely death can now feel closure, thanks to the determination and teamwork of the Vallejo Police Department and partnering law enforcement agencies. May Naomi now rest in peace. In 1992, 57-year-old James Elsel was a beloved father and a small business owner. He owned the Sugarloaf Mountain Market, a convenience store in Comas, Maryland. In the early morning hours of March 22, 1992, a customer discovered James' body inside of his store. He had been hit over the head and stabbed 29 times. What little money had been in the store's cash register had been taken. James had apparently fought fiercely for his life as blood from his assailant was left behind at the scene. The blood was the only real clue investigators had to work with. Comas was small, rural, and close-knit. The robbery was unusual for the community, and the murder was almost unthinkable. James had only owned his store for less than 2 years, but was already a fixture in the community, which rallied around his memory and his family. Unfortunately, James' case quickly went cold, and the town of Comas and James' family spent year after year without answers. In 2017, however, police were able to use new developments in DNA technology to generate a new lead in the case. They contacted Parabon Nanolabs, who used their snapshot DNA analysis service to generate images of individual whose blood was left behind at the scene, one showing him as a young man and another of what he may look like having aged 30 years. These images were released to the public, but did not result in an arrest in the case. Authorities then turned to genetic genealogy to help identify James's killer. Using public genealogy databases, they were able to identify relatives of the perpetrator and eventually identified a potential suspect in late January of 2020. That suspect was 51-year-old Hans Hewitts, who was living in Virginia Beach. On February 10, 2020, investigators obtained a warrant to collect a DNA sample from Hewitts. On February 11th, they obtained the DNA sample from him. When asked about the case, Hewitts only acknowledged once getting into a fight with someone many years before, but he was unaware that the other man died. The DNA from the cheek swab taken from Hans Hewitts was quickly processed. It was a match to the blood left behind at the crime scene. On February 12, 2020, detectives from the Montgomery County Police Department in Maryland, in conjunction with the U.S. Marshals, went to arrest Hewitts on charges of first-degree murder, felony murder, and robbery with a dangerous weapon. Authorities went to Hewitts' home on Maitland Drive, where they found him inside of his car. When they tried to arrest him, Hewitts pulled a gun. A neighbor was recording the brief police standoff from down the street, and on the video police can be heard telling Hewitts several times to put down his weapon. He did not. Hewitts was then shot and killed. The exact details of the moments before the police decided to fire, and their reason for doing so, have not been released, as there has to be an official investigation into the incident. The detectives involved in the shooting have been placed on administrative leave until the investigation is completed, as is standard procedure. Hewitt's wife, Hattie, is a private investigator and retired Washington, D.C. police officer. The couple had only been married for 6 years, but had known each other since they were children. Hattie does not believe that her husband, who did not have a criminal record, committed the crime, and has stated that she will be working to clear her husband's name. James Elsel's family, however, does accept the results of the investigation and the answers they have provided. "I wish the guy could have served time for the crime, but it's just a relief," James' daughter, Perpetua Edwards, said. "To know that it's over is a huge relief for me and my siblings." August 12, 2019, began as a typical day for Lindsay Burbeck. Her assistant, Itcher, was on vacation, and Lindsay had planned to spend the day with her family. In the afternoon, she and her daughter Sarah went shopping in Blackburn, and afterward, they agreed to enjoy a quiet family evening over tea and meet Sarah's human boyfriend. They said their goodbyes, and Lindsay returned home to change before heading out for her daily walk in the woods. Around 4 p.m., she left the house and was never seen again. The search for answers regarding Lindsay's sudden disappearance centers around the town of Blackburn, located in Lancashire, northwest England. Situated along the Blackburn River near the Leeds-Liverpool Canal, the town lies at a crossroads of 4 major roads and is surrounded by rich coal mines. Known for its picturesque natural landscape, Blackburn is home to 4 large budded parks. Lindsay had separated from her husband, Tim Burbeck, in July 2018, but the two continued living together in Upton until March 2019. Afterward, she moved to a new home on Burnley Road in Hancock. What happened on that fateful day remains a mystery, and questions about why and who might be responsible for her disappearance continue to linger. Lindsay cared for her 2 adult children, Thiven, 20, and Sarah, 17. She worked as an upper-grade teacher's aide at Hill Elementary School in Burnley and loved being surrounded by children. Lindsay was a talented artist who could go the extra mile to create the most amazing props for school productions and plays. On the fateful day of August 12th, she went for a walk in a wooded area known as Capus near her home in the village of Hancote on the outskirts of Accrington and disappeared. At the appointed time, Sarah and her boyfriend Brandon arrived at Lindsay's home, but no one answered the door. Sarah became worried as it was out of character for her mother to forget a scheduled tea party. She tried several times to contact Lindsay, but no one answered the phone. Sarah then sent her a text message that read, "Where are you? We sat outside for an hour and called 6 times. After receiving no response, Sarah sent another text message with a series of question marks, but again received no response. After waiting outside Lindsay's house for an hour, Sarah called her father, Tim Burbeck, to let him know her mom wasn't home and wasn't answering her phone. Tim took a frightened Sarah and Brandon back to his house. Near midnight, Sarah and Tim headed to Lindsay's house again, but with a set of spare keys. To their dismay, she never showed up. Inside, "Dispatcher, my ex-wife seems to be missing. We can't find dispatcher. My ex-wife seems to be missing. We can't find her. It doesn't look like her." Lindsay Burbeck was reported missing. Lindsay's disappearance shook up the community. The people of the small suburb banded together and went out in search of the woman. There were hundreds of people. Men and women, grandparents and people walking dogs, teenagers with bicycles, and even moms with strollers. To most, Lindsay was a stranger, but that didn't matter. After days of desperate searches, social media appeals, and posters, people still gathered at Compass for 2 consecutive days in the hope of finding a vital clue that could solve the mystery of Lindsay Burbeck's disappearance. After several days of fruitless searching, it was clear to everyone that the search was going to be difficult. With each passing day, the chances of finding Lindsay alive dwindled. Detectives classified Lindsay Burbeck as high risk. She had never gone missing before, and her family described the disappearance as very uncharacteristic of her. Nevertheless, the search did not stop for a moment. Locals printed thousands of posters to distribute throughout the neighborhood, while a Facebook group associated with the search quickly grew to 10,000 members. A few hours after the police appeal was posted online, the first posters with Lindsay's face on them could be seen all over the neighborhood. Within a couple of days, there wasn't a lamppost, storefront, or traffic light that didn't have a poster calling for the search for Lindsay. Police launched an investigation into the disappearance from the house as extensive searches were carried out by specialist police officers, dog handlers, Lancashire Fire and Rescue Service, mountain rescue volunteers, and the city's search and rescue team. Drones and helicopters were also deployed to search the area covering Coppice and the surrounding open countryside for a considerable distance, including popular walking and running routes. For days after Lindsay's disappearance, Lancashire police released CCTV footage showing when she was last seen alive, walking along Burnley Road at 4:10 in the afternoon towards Coppice. She was wearing a purple jacket, black leggings, and dark sneakers with white soles. A week had passed since her disappearance on August 19th, and with each passing day, there was less and less hope of finding Lindsay Burbeck alive. Police are still no closer to the whereabouts of the mother of two, but emphasized that there was no evidence that she was the victim of a criminal act, meaning there was still a chance of finding her alive. The search for Lindsay continued. That evening, hundreds of local residents took part in the first mass public search of Coppice after a rallying call was made on social media. Things moved when a local resident's dog ran into a wooded area in Accrington Cemetery. He yelled and called her name several times, but the dog didn't respond. The dog hit its head in the bushes, sniffing and trying to dig for something. The dog's owner walked over to him, stood next to him, and was horrified to find that there was something very soft under his feet. He was frightened and bounced back. Then he smelled a horrible odor and flies were swirling around. A plastic bag and something that looked like a foot were visible from the ground. On August 24th, 12 days after Lindsay Burbeck disappeared, her body was found under the most horrific circumstances, buried in a cemetery. The naked body, wrapped in two clear plastic bags mixed with earth and grass, was placed across a shallow grave. The search for Lindsay Burbeck was considered complete. A murder investigation was officially launched. Pathologist Dr. Naomi Carter, after conducting an autopsy, determined that death was due to a broken neck. The trauma was inflicted with such force that the entire larynx had crushing injuries. The neck was most likely struck with a foot or knee. An attempt to cut off Lindsay's right leg after death was also determined, possibly with a saw, as tine marks were found. A large laceration was found on the leg, which had been cut down to the bone. The injuries Lindsay suffered were catastrophic. Dr. Carter also reported that due to the poor condition of the body, it was quite difficult to determine the victim's injuries, but she did not rule out any sexual activity on the day of her disappearance, which could not be ascertained due to the level of decomposition of the body. Prior to the discovery of Lindsay's body, members of the public and police had searched the same area for several days without success. Community volunteers and a police dog handler reported seeing a blue wheelie garbage can abandoned in bushes nearby. However, at this stage of the investigation, no one was yet aware of the significance of the tank. Volunteers who searched the cemetery at 9 p.m. August 20th also found the same dumpster with a dark stain on the outside and thought it might be blood. After taking pictures of the dumpster, they called the police. 2 police officers arrived on the scene to inspect it and found a brown mark that they thought was dirt. The police said the dumpster looked brand new and there was no evidence at the time to link it to Lindsay's disappearance. Therefore, it was left in place. There were other important clues found in the cemetery that were not immediately accepted. For example, local resident Christine Alderson discovered a bloody cloth on the grass at the cemetery on August 18th while she and her daughter were walking their dogs. She said the blood on the cloth was fresh and red, but thought it might have belonged to a homeless man who frequented the area. Another woman who walks dogs, Judith Bibby, reported seeing red clothing hanging on a barbed wire fence near the Cargill Hill Trail that was probably Lindsay's jacket. She also heard a voice, presumably a child's, but heard no struggle, yelling, or screaming. On August 25th, investigators and it came back positive. The gloves contained the perpetrator's DNA on the inside surfaces, and Lindsay's DNA was found on the outside surface of the left glove. A pair of her Skechers sneakers, which had been cut along the sole, were also found in a blue plastic bag discarded in the cemetery. Examination of other evidence revealed that Lindsay's body was wrapped in some kind of plastic sheeting. And between the body and the sheeting was found foliage and grass that was not in the cemetery grounds. This led investigators to believe that the body had been moved from another location. That's when detectives remembered a blue trash can that had repeatedly caught the attention of volunteers. Police officers studying the CCTV footage soon made a startling discovery that left the investigation team baffled. Several images showed a young man pulling a blue wheelie garbage can in the Burley Road area. Over the next few days, a CCTV camera captured a certain guy returning to the cemetery 4 times. Thanks to that footage, a suspect emerged. The video of a young guy carrying a trash can down the street, possibly with Lindsay's body, became a sensation. The video was shown on the news with a plea for help identifying the man, and it worked. The boy was identified by shocked teachers and parents. The teen surrendered to police the same day. His name was withheld until sentencing due to his age. He was only 16 years old at the time of the crime. The boy in the videotape turned out to be local resident Rocky Marciano Price. Rocky Marciano Price lived with his parents and 5 siblings on Winnie Hill Road in Accrington. It had been the Price family home for about 3 decades. The young lad had an impressive array of mental health abnormalities. Rocky had suffered from autism, attention deficit disorder, and hyperactivity since childhood. His low IQ created additional learning and communication challenges. He attended an alternative school in Barnoldswick several days a week and was described by teachers as a very quiet and non-speaking student. In 2015, a psychologist assessed Price as having a limited understanding of his own emotions and his own emotional well-being. He had pronounced impairments in understanding the connections between events and emotions. Another 2016 report described Price as unresponsive to strangers and in constant need of supervision and care. Timothy Bradley, who taught at the school for 18 months, said they were always looking for ways to involve him in education, but Price preferred practical things to academic subjects. Price hardly ever engaged in conversation even when it came to a topic that interested him. Teachers described Rocky Price as quite strong physically and tough for his age. He went to the gym regularly, liked to tend to the chickens on the family farm, and loved watching movies and playing Xbox. The guy lived in his own world and wasn't always aware of his actions. So what drove him to attack Lindsay Burbeck? Nothing at all. She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time when Rocky Price was hunting lonely women. He was looking for a woman to kill, and he didn't care who it was. This was a completely random murder at the hands of a stranger. On August 12, 2020, exactly 1 year after the crime, Price finally stood trial. Rocky Marciano Price was unanimously found guilty by a jury after an 8-day retrial and 4 hours of deliberation. Appearing via video link from Her Majesty's Prison Wetherby, Price 17 did not react in any way when the judge read out the verdict. There was also no reaction from his parents in court. He pleaded guilty to helping dispose of Lindsay's body, but claimed he played no part in her death. Rocky Price claimed he was approached by a male stranger and asked to assist in the burial of the woman for a fee. In a prepared statement, he admitted moving the garbage can and burying the body, but said he had no involvement in Lindsay's death. However, a search of his home in Accrington revealed plastic bags that were identical to those at Lindsay's grave. A tracksuit and other clothing was also analyzed and matched the one he was wearing on surveillance cameras on August 12, 1617. Defense attorney Mark Fenholz told jurors that Price did a horrible and heinous act by burying the woman's body in the cemetery, but he was not her killer. Despite the abundance of evidence against him, Rocky Price pleaded not guilty to the crime, but admitted to moving Lindsay's body. After 2 days of questioning, Price, through his attorney, prepared a statement to explain his movements between Kappas, where police believe Lindsay was killed, and the cemetery where her body was found. But the prosecutor affirmatively stated that Rocky Price acted completely alone. The motive for the random attack on the 47-year-old mother of 2 was never revealed, as the perpetrator did not even know the victim. The judge sentenced Price to life in prison with a minimum term of 16 years. He will only be released when the parole board decides he is not a danger. The judge said the attack was swift and brutal. There was no doubt the defendant sprung with the intent to kill a woman who was walking by. Just minutes before Lindsay's incident, Zoe Braithwaite had managed to get away from a hooded teenager with her hands in her pockets, walking alone on a parallel path. Her sixth sense kicked in, and the woman was instantly wary. Zoe was confused by the guy's appearance. He looked out of place for a walk in the woods for this time of year. She quickened her step and then ran away. That probably saved the woman. If it hadn't been her, it could have been someone else. And it was Lindsay. This was a premeditated attack. After missing one woman, he didn't back off his plan to attack another lone woman. His actions after the crime clearly show that he had the ability to plan and reason. His teachers told the court that he was to plan and reason. His teachers told the court that he was much better at practical tasks than academic subjects. He used this ability to hide his body. Rocky Price was found to have made 2 return trips to Capas on the evening of August 12th. The first incident occurred at 6:55 p.m. 12th. The first incident occurred at 6:55 p.m. when he was seen on CCTV cameras carrying a black rucksack. Possibly in it, he was carrying a found saw to dismember Lindsay's body. The next incident occurred at 8:28 p.m. when dog walker Anthony Dewhurst was seen pulling out an already empty garbage can. This is the same spot where his grandfather, who bears his name, and other family members are buried. Without panic or excitement, young Rocky Price, acting alone, set in motion a plan to dispose of Lindsay's body by placing it in a blue garbage can like a piece of trash, and then burying it in a shallow grave in Accrington Cemetery wrapped in 2 plastic bags. He set in motion a plan to dispose of Lindsay's body by first hiding her in a blue wheelie garbage can and then dragging her to the cemetery. Finding a quiet and secluded spot near the railroad line, he spent over an hour burying her body before leaving the saw, gloves, and a trash can at the scene. The murder of a stranger in broad daylight, for which there is no rational explanation, is particularly horrifying to all right-thinking members of society. The random nature of the attack suggests that the accused poses a very real danger to members of the public. The stalking of another woman before he killed Lindsay Burbeck demonstrates that his crime was not caused by a sudden loss of control. 24 hours after he was found guilty of the crime, publication restrictions were finally lifted by a judge, allowing his name and picture to be made public for the first time. Rocky Marciano Price's identity was kept secret during the first and second trial. The jury was told many important details about Price, but they could not be fully disclosed because of his young age. The judge rescinded the disclosure of the restrictions after the jury unanimously found Price guilty of the crime. The defendant's mental illness cannot in any way excuse or even explain his actions. After all, it is quite obvious that his actions. After all, it is quite obvious that he realized that it was terribly wrong to kill, but did it anyway. Although fortunately, such crimes are rare, they instill fear in society. However, the main question in this case remains unanswered. Why did the young guy needed to kill a strange woman, and for what? Only Rocky Price knows the answer, but he didn't answer it. Perhaps if it wasn't Lindsay Burbeck, it could have been someone else. Lindsay's funeral was held at St. Margaret's Church in Hampton on September 20th. More than 200 mourners gathered at the church as police stopped traffic on Manchester Road, while Lindsay's coffin with her body covered in flowers was carried into the church. Dozens of flowers from friends and family and from strangers whose hearts were touched by Lindsay's story were left at the scene. Sarah described her mom as a very optimistic and positive woman. Lindsay was making plans for the future. She was planning a trip to Glasgow with her friend, Sharon. She dreamed of finding love on the Match.com dating site. Lindsay Burbeck planned a long and happy life for herself and looked forward to the future with optimism. But all those dreams were interrupted one sunny summer day. Lindsay Burbeck's family and the detectives who investigated the crime welcomed the jury's unanimous verdict, but said no court verdict could ever bring Lindsay back or spare her family and loved ones the grief of loss. In front of the courthouse after the verdict was announced, members of the defendant's family wore T-shirts that read, "Wrongfully convicted, set this boy free." The back of the T-shirts read, the killer is still at large. Maybe Price is an aspiring maniac. He just wanted to take a man's life, to feel what it's like to watch someone die and mutilate them. Most likely in any form, it's an absolute neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by problems with social interaction, motor, and behavioral stereotypes. In translation, the word autism means a person who has gone into himself or a person within himself. Autism is still an understudied developmental disorder that can occur due to genetic or hereditary abnormalities. The exact cause is not fully understood, but in our story, the punishment most likely fits the crime. On September 2nd, 2015 at 7:42 p.m., a car entered the Gable Park parking lot. The car parked and a beautiful young woman got out. She had a shopping bag in her hands. She slammed the door shut, stepped away from the car, and a minute later, 2 gunshots rang out. With the business completed, the dark figure quickly jumped into a black Jeep Cherokee that pulled up and fled the apartment complex. Local resident Hashim Saad, who was walking to the parking lot to pick up his car, saw the injured woman and called the emergency services. Officers arrived at the scene of the tragedy and found the injured woman. Unfortunately, she was already dead. The victim turned out to be 35-year-old Kendra Hatcher. Kendra K. Hatcher was born February 3, 1980 to Reagan Hatcher and Bonnie Gibson Jameson Calley in Springfield, Sangamon County, Illinois. Her parents divorced, and her mother married Bruce Jameson. She was not an only child. She had 3 sisters, Jamie Kaufman, Ashley Lipscomb, Melissa Jameson, and 1 brother, Neil Hatcher. She grew up in Police and Plains and studied dentistry there. After her divorce in 2010, she moved to Dallas where she began working at Smilazona Dental Studio. Kendra had a strong Christy and faith and wanted to use her dental skills to help others. For example, the clinic provided services to disadvantaged children completely free of charge. In her spare time, Kendra taught Bible studies and participated in volunteer programs that included building churches overseas and providing free dental services to children in Ecuador. Dallas was welcoming to the young professional. Kendra's professional life quickly gained momentum, and her personal life flourished as well. On May 24, 2015, Kendra began dating Dr. Ricardo Paniagua. Kendra and Ricardo met through a dating app, and from their first date, they were inseparable. They both had similar values, interests, and wanted the same things in life. Ricardo was finishing his residency in dermatology at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. And even though they had only been in a relationship for a few months, the young men were already discussing their upcoming marriage. However, an incident in a parking lot took the life of his beloved woman and cut short all future plans. Investigators who arrived at the scene of the massacre examined the crime scene and put forward the version of robbery as Kendra's purse and some valuables were missing. Bullet fragments and a gun magazine were found on the ground next to her body. However, the manner of shooting and the traces of the gunshot pushed the robbery version to the background. 1 bullet struck the woman in the back and the other in the head. The entry wound from the bullet was at the top of the head, and it exited through the chin, indicating that Kendra had her hands up and behind her head when she was shot. The murder theory was confirmed when it was possible to obtain CCTV footage and reconstruct a picture of what happened. The footage shows a black Jeep Grand Cherokee pulling into the parking lot at 07:15 p.m. Half an hour later, Kendra returns home and drives into the same garage. A few minutes later, a man approaches her, shoots her, and runs to the side, after which he jumps in and black Jeep on the move. The videos were of poor quality, and the crime scene itself was not visible on them. It was impossible to identify the assailants, but the vehicle was put on a wanted list. It was decided to place the camera footage, images of the Jeep, and the driver in the media. The authorities appealed to the public for help, and it helped. Police were contacted by a man named Jose Luis Ortiz. He reported that the car in the footage belonged to him, but Jose wasn't involved in the shooting, and he wasn't driving it. When questioned, Jose explained that on the morning of September 2nd, he was approached by 2 of his girlfriends, Brenda Delgado and Crystal Cortez. They asked Jose to repair their car and, in return, to lend them his Jeep until the evening. The man agreed. He also said that later that evening, Brenda called Jose to a restaurant where they were at the time of the crime. Crystal Cortez, later that evening, drove the Jeep to Jose's house, so the man was quite surprised when his Jeep made the news. When Jose saw his Jeep on the TV program, he asked Brenda about it. She first said that it was a different Jeep on the screen. Then Brenda explained that Crystal had been traveling somewhere on her business, and she didn't know about it. Brenda Delgado suggested that Jose not tell anyone anything and to simply repaint the Jeep. She was willing to pay to paint the Jeep. Jose was awaiting a decision on his U.S. citizenship and did not want any trouble with the police. He realized that Brenda had set him up, so Jose went to the police again and testified again. So the police tracked all the movements of the Jeep that day and found the two young women whose names Jose had given them. Brenda Delgado was the first person investigators called in for questioning. The woman told police that she never knew Kendra Hatcher and had never seen her before. When asked where she was on September 2nd at 7:42 p.m., Brenda stated her alibi because she was at Chili's restaurant with Jose. Brenda even provided receipts for the dinner. But how often, and more importantly, what do you keep dinner receipts for? So gradually, assembled in minute detail, the truth that the participants in the crime tried to hide was revealed. The central figure in the investigation was Brenda Delgado. She was born into a fairly simple family, Luis and Maria Delgado, who immigrated to Dallas from Mexico, where her father was a factory worker. They found a home in a low-income neighborhood in southeast Dallas. It was then that Luis found a job in construction, and his wife worked at the U.S. Post Office cleaning houses. Brenda was their second child and their only girl. Not only was she an excellent student who was loved by her teachers, but she also worked part-time at a flower store and as a waitress. Brenda was very ambitious and dreamed of going to medical school someday. But the sad reality was that her parents couldn't afford the expensive tuition. So after graduating from Skyline High School in 2000, she continued to live with her parents, only dreaming of an affluent and beautiful life. On the way to her goal, Brenda worked hard. She was a dental assistant, and alongside that, she worked at a Dayspring North Park Center where she whitened her teeth. In 2012, Brenda met Ricardo Paniagua and fell in love with him. Their first date was at a Jennifer Lopez concert and was like her dream date. In November 2012, 3 months after they met, Brenda moved in with Ricardo at his home in Fitzhugh Urban Flats. The man was also charmed by Brenda so much that he even met her parents. In 2013, she uploaded a post in honor of his birthday on Facebook where she wrote words of congratulations. "Happy birthday to the most amazing and smartest man I know. Ricky, together, we have shared so much happiness. You are my best friend. I love you with all my heart and can't imagine life without you." Brenda then found out she was pregnant, but at Ricardo's insistence, she terminated the pregnancy, which left her heartbroken. A little recovered from the decision, Brenda decides to devote herself to her career and her beloved Ricky. In the fall of the same year, she enrolled in Sanford. At first glance, it seemed that Brenda had gotten over the emotional blow of the breakup. However, this was not the case. Brenda's painful dependence on Ricardo only gained momentum. And when Ricky posted a joint photo on social media with his new lover, Kendra, who looked like a photo model, Brenda was up to something terrible. Many who knew her testified that Brenda dreamed of getting rid of Kendra. After obtaining information about Brenda and her personal life, investigators were able to surmise that the offended woman had a motive to get rid of her rival. Ricardo confirmed that Brenda Delgado was his ex-girlfriend. They dated intermittently from 2012 to 2015. They broke up a few months before Ricky and Kendra met. Ricardo was confident that he and Brenda remained friends and saw no problems between Brenda and Kendra. After all, he had been on dates with other women before meeting Kendra. And why would it be meeting Kendra that would turn Brenda's mind? However, the picture of the reconstructed events confirmed how insidious and cruel an abused woman can be. Brenda Delgado thought she had devised the perfect plan to win back her former lover and rid him of the superfluous figure, Kendra Hatcher. At first, she established communication with Ricardo pretending to be his best friend, provided all kinds of support, was interested in how he and Kendra are progressing in their relationship. Secretly, She knew everything about their plans for the future, and Ricardo believed that this is a sincere interest. But it's a shame that men know women so poorly and sometimes blindly trust them. After Ricardo learned that Kendra had died, he shared his grief with Brenda via text message, and she supported her friend in every way possible and offered to do anything for him. Ricky had no way of guessing his ex's true motives. As it turned out, Brenda had been playing her own game for months. She had opened Ricardo's mail and knew about all his plans with Kendra, even where and when they had booked tickets. All of this was infuriating to Brenda. She longed to be rid of Kendra Hatcher. Truly believing that she had taken her place, Brenda transferred Ricardo's account to her phone and kept tabs on him. Following Ricky and Kendra practically became her raison d'etre. Brenda became completely dependent on the stalking. She quit her job and devoted all her time to realizing her goals. Over time, a cruel and terrifying plan was born in Brenda's mind: to kill the hated Kendra and take her place beside her lover. For its realization, Brenda addressed to many of her acquaintances with an offer for money to harm Kendra Hatcher. Thus, through mutual acquaintances, she found a single mother, 21-year-old Crystal Cortez, who, because of the big financial problems, just for $500 was ready to help her. At Brenda's behest, Crystal found the perpetrator, a man named Christopher Love, who agreed to commit the crime. Crystal handed Christopher $500 from Brenda, as well as 2 types of illegal. Two women followed Kendra to learn her habits and daily schedule to further select the location and time of the crime. On September 2nd, 2015, they took Jose's car. Crystal and Christopher Love waited for Kendra in the parking lot. They did not pursue her on her way home from work because they were afraid of falling behind her in traffic. In the evening, the criminals completed their devious plan and were rewarded for a job well done. A few days after the crime, Crystal Cortez and Christopher Love were apprehended. The suspects denied their guilt and their presence at the scene of the crime. However, the situation changed when Love was found to have the gun that killed Kendra in the side compartment of the car. Crystal, on the other hand, was nervous and constantly confused in her testimony, telling different stories about the reasons for the appearance of the SUV in different parts of the city. So at the first interrogation, Crystal admitted that she was the woman who was driving in the parking lot, but she arrived there at the will of an armed carjacker who got into the SUV and forced her into the parking lot that evening. She, wishing to remain innocent, gave false testimony saying that her son was in the car with her, but this information was later not confirmed because no child was recorded on the cameras. As the interrogation continued and more evidence became available, Crystal changed her testimony and wanted to make a deal with the investigation. She agreed to testify against Brenda in exchange for less time. She told police that Brenda wanted Kendra dead, and the crime was her idea. According to Crystal, within 2 weeks of her meeting with Brenda, they began planning the crime. The police discovered that Brenda wasn't just unhappy that her relationship with Ricardo was over. She was obsessed and desperate to win him back. She pretended to Ricky that she was happy to be his loyal friend, but her life began to fall apart. She began to resent Kendra, believing that she had taken her place. According to Crystal, it was at this point that Brenda decided that she wanted to get rid of Kendra Hatcher. The perfect crime plan emerged in Brenda Delgado's mind. In testimony, Crystal detailed how Brenda devised the perfect crime. Enlisting each other's support, Brenda and Crystal began to formulate a plan to kill Kendra. They met many times and developed many plans. The original plan was to inject Kendra with illegal substances or sedatives and then get rid of her. But to avoid being under suspicion, Brenda needed a reliable enforcer and began looking for one. They drove around the scraggliest neighborhoods and asked a few people if they could help. That's how they met Christopher Love. He agreed to help and took an active part in deciding the modus operandi of the crime. The trio unanimously decided that the best way to kill was to shoot him because it was quick. While cooperating, Crystal revealed that the date of September 2nd was not chosen at random. Brenda knew that Kendra and Ricardo were planning a trip to Mexico, so it was decided to get rid of the woman before the happy vacation. Brenda told Crystal that she wanted the crime to look like a botched robbery. Next, the criminals chose the location of the massacre. For days, they desperately tracked Kendra's movements and recorded her minute by minute to make sure nothing changed on the appointed day. After work, they traced her route home and figured out how to discreetly enter the apartment complex's secure parking garage. On September 1st, 2015, they made a final check. On the day of the crime, early in the morning, Brenda and Crystal picked up the Jeep from Jose, then picked up Christopher along the way. Brenda was dropped off at the library in Carrollton, so she would have an alibi, and Crystal and Christopher went to Kendra's apartment complex. They waited across the street for about 30 minutes, then drove to Kendra's place of employment. After waiting for their victim, they followed her but lost her in traffic. However, they returned to the house first and waited there. As soon as Kendra drove in, Christopher got out of the car. He was wearing gloves, approached Kendra with a gun, and shot her when she got out of the car. According to Crystal, she did not actually see the shooting, but heard it. Crystal then drove Crystal home, picked up her son from his grandmother on the way, and later met Brenda at Jose's house where she handed him the Jeep. Thus, Brenda's dream came true. She was rid of her hated rival, and all she had to do was wait for her beloved Ricardo's message. Brenda was happy that she had managed to pull off the perfect crime. Crystal's candid confession and testimony against Brenda left no doubt about Brenda Delgado's guilt, and a warrant for her arrest was promptly issued. But when police officers arrived with the warrant, she was no longer at home. Having dual citizenship, Brenda Delgado fled to Mexico. After fleeing, Brenda's involvement in a contract killing became apparent, and she was put on a wanted list. On April 6, 2016, the FBI placed her on the list of most wanted fugitives, assigning a reward of $100,000 for information about her. So Brenda Delgado became the only woman on the list at the time and the 9th woman on the list ever. But just 2 days later in Torreon, Coahuila, she was apprehended by Mexican authorities and extradited to the United States on October 6th. Mexico agreed to extradite Brenda, but only on the grounds that she would not face the death penalty. When she was extradited back to the United States, she was formally charged with capital murder. Brenda was extradited to Texas, and she was brought to trial. Hearings in the case began in 2017. The grief-stricken relatives of Kendra and Ricardo did not hesitate to express themselves during the court appearance. The oil was added to the fire by witnesses who confirmed Brenda's intentions and her dangerous obsession with her former lover. Brenda's cousin, Moses Martinez, spoke in court about his sister's depression after the end of her and Ricky's relationship. He also revealed that Brenda offered to pay him if he hit Kendra with a baseball bat. He refused to do so. Brenda's friend, Jennifer Escobar, testified at trial that Brenda was obsessed with Ricardo and read all of his emails and tracked his movements on her phone. She told the jury that Brenda even kept a copy of his house key and had access to his bank accounts. Jennifer revealed that Brenda had asked her to help eliminate the hated Kendra Hatcher too. She also told the court that Brenda wanted her to either inject her with something lethal or use a bat and leave her in a coma. For her help, Brenda offered to give her $2,000 out of a car and illegal drugs if she would do it. Jennifer discussed the offer with her parents and then refused. It is quite strange that adults, having been offered the suggestion to harm or kill someone, contemplated doing so, and none of them went to the police to report a threat to a person's life or health. The court heard evidence about obsession from a number of people who knew Brenda, so the court found that Brenda had a motive to want Kendra dead. She saw her as an obstacle to getting what she wanted, and she wanted only one thing: to get back to Ricky. The court received corroboration that in the months leading up to Kendra's death, Brenda became increasingly obsessed. As evidence of Brenda's involvement, an ATM withdrawal receipt in the amount of $500, which she subsequently gave to Crystal for doing the work, was presented at the hearing. Christopher Love received a cash payment in the amount of $600. The cell phone data provided also indicated that Brenda, Crystal, and Christopher were together prior to the crime. More than 99 calls were recorded between Brenda and Crystal between August 22nd and September 4th, proving their constant communication to discuss the plan to kill Kendra Hatcher. The defendant's attorney tried to shift much of the blame to the perpetrators, but it didn't work. The defense argued that Brenda was not at the scene of the crime. She had an alibi and receipts confirming her presence at the restaurant at the time of the crime. Brenda herself did not plead guilty, but the jury thought otherwise. It took them only 30 minutes to find Brenda Delgado guilty of the murder of Kendra Hatcher. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Christopher Love, the direct perpetrator of the crime, pleaded guilty and was sentenced to death via injection. Crystal Cortez, in exchange for cooperating with the investigation and pleading guilty, received a sentence of 35 years in prison with parole eligibility. The family of Kendra Hatcher was satisfied with the court's decision and silently withdrew from the courtroom after the verdict. The Delgado family did not believe to the last that their Brenda could be involved. They knew her as a loving daughter and woman, healthy, and with good family and Christian values. I hope this cautionary tale of female perfidy and mentally unhealthy obsessive love will leave a mark on every woman's soul and serve as a cautionary tale in new love relationships. For no man is worth a human life. Take care of yourself. On the evening of May 25, 2003, as the sun was setting, a Boeing 727 took off from Quatro de Febreiro International Airport in Luanda, Angola. This was not a planned departure. The plane, tail number N844AA, had not been scheduled for takeoff, nor was it cleared to depart. It had no flight plan on file, and air traffic control attempted to contact the plane as it made its way down the runway erratically. However, there was no response. The 727 took off with its lights off and its transponder not transmitting. The plane, along with the two men known to be on board who had been working to restore it, has never been seen again. An 844AA was originally part of the American Airlines fleet. Manufactured in 1975, it had flown for the airline for over 25 years. In January 2002, the aircraft was sold to Aerospace Sales and Leasing, a company based in Miami, Florida, after American Airlines retired it. Due to the airline's meticulous maintenance program, an 844AA was still in excellent condition. The following month, the plane came to the attention of Keith Irwin, a 57-year-old entrepreneur from South Africa. Irwin had recently entered into a joint venture with Cargo Air Transport Systems, a South African company that had secured a contract to transport fuel to diamond mines in Angola. Due to Angola's ongoing civil war, ground transportation to the mines had become almost impossible. Air transport, while exceptionally dangerous, offered a safer alternative with a higher chance of success. Irwin was instrumental in bringing the Boeing 727 to Africa, but its mysterious disappearance would remain unsolved. The joint venture's sole investor supplied $450,000 for the acquisition of an aircraft and flight crews from America. Irwin originally traveled to Miami to meet with a different corporation and lease a different aircraft. He originally planned to lease a 727 for a year and hire 2 flight crews, each with 3 members, for the same amount of time. This deal fell through, and Irwin lost $140,000 in the process. The 6 crewmen were still available, however, and Irwin soon met Maury Joseph, the owner of Aerospace Sales and Leasing, who had 3 recently retired 727s for him to choose from. Under his agreement with Joseph, Irwin would purchase an aircraft rather than lease it. The sale price was $1 million, and Joseph agreed to remove the passenger seats from the plane's cabin to make room for the 10 tanks Irwin had purchased to transport fuel. Irwin provided a down payment of $125,000 and was supposed to pay the rest of the amount he owed within 30 days. Irwin was allowed to take the plane to Angola, but Joseph sent one of his employees, Mike Gabriel, along with the 6 crew members to ensure that the remainder of the money would be paid. Keith Irwin, Mike Gabriel, and the 6 crewmen left Miami on N844AA on February 28, 2002. However, they did not arrive in Angola until March 14th. Irwin and his partners had failed to acquire the necessary permits to land the plane in Angola, leaving them in limbo for 2 weeks. They were finally able to pay the necessary fees and secure the required permits to land at the airport in Luanda. During this time and through this process, Irwin also spent all of the $185,000 that had been invested in the joint venture. Several of the 6 crew members who had come to Angola to fly the 727 had previously worked in various parts of Africa, but the conditions they faced on this job were far worse than any they had previously worked under. The apartment where they were housed in Luanda had no drinkable water or electricity and was near an open sewer. They were concerned about the heavily armed security guard assigned to the project. Of most concern to them was the fact that their passports had been taken away from them by the company that had hired Irwin's joint venture to transport fuel when they arrived in Angola. Their request to get the passports back was denied by the company, and they only received them after getting the U.S. Embassy to intervene. 2 out of the 6 crew members flew back to the United States once they had their passports back, without receiving any of the salary they were owed. The other 4 crewmen stayed on in hopes eventually being paid once all of the problems surrounding the venture were worked out and they were able to begin making the flights they had been hired to perform. Those flights would not begin for several more weeks. In addition to losing 2 of the members of his crew, Keith Irwin also lost his partner, Cargo Air Transport Systems, and had to find a new backer for the venture. He ultimately found one, but his 727 would now be making fuel deliveries for a new client. Despite all of the problems with the business side of the operation, the 727 finally began making delivery flights in April. In 2010, one of the members of the flight crew spoke to reporter Tim Wright, but asked that his name not be disclosed. He was an Air Force veteran with 30 years of flight experience, and he described the conditions he faced during the delivery flights he made while working for Irwin as the most dangerous flying in the world. He and his fellow crew members had to base their approaches and landings to their destination at the diamond mines around avoiding ground fire, and the runways they had to land on were not paved, so their landing gear would often get stuck in the dirt. The runways were also not flat, and they witnessed other planes from competing companies crash on them. After seeing one of these accidents, the anonymous crew member fabricated a story about his mother being ill as an excuse to ask for time off to return to the United States. He did not return to Angola. By the end of April, all of the members of the crew had returned to the United States. Keith Irwin was able to find a local crew to continue flying the plane and making the fuel deliveries. But by May of 2002, his long-troubled venture completely collapsed. Around this time, Irwin believed he was being followed by someone hired by one of his partners. He began blocking the door of his hotel room at night. One night, he heard someone insert a keycard into the lock in his door and the door unlock. Whoever unlocked the door could not enter the room because of the chair Irwin had wedged under the door handle and was scared off when Irwin began yelling at him. The hotel's night clerk would later admit to hotel security that he had accepted a bribe to provide a copy of the keycard to Irwin's room. Irwin left the country the following day, leaving the 727 behind in Angola. Despite its age, N844AA was essentially in mint condition when it was first brought to Angola, but after only 17 delivery flights, it was practically falling apart. The harsh flight conditions it faced, as well as the stress of carrying tanks it was not designed to transport, rendered the plane worthless. It would never be of any value again. Another one of Maury Joseph's clients would later say, "You can't put water tanks full of fuel in an airplane and expect it to be good. Totally stupid." The plane remained parked at the airport in Luanda, accruing parking fees on top of the other fees and bills the aircraft had accrued during its brief period of use in Angola. Maury Joseph and aerospace sales and leasing also had not been paid. Irwin made 2 payments towards what he still owed on the plane upon his return to Africa, but then stopped sending money before paying off the rest of the $1 million he had agreed to pay for the plane. Joseph had fired Mike Gabriel in the midst of all the chaos in the spring of 2002 for failing to secure these payments or bring the plane back to Florida in their absence. In November of 2002, Joseph traveled to Nigeria with another 727 he was planning to sell. He brought with him a man named Ben Charles Padilla, who was a freelance flight engineer and aircraft mechanic. Padilla was a native of Pensacola, Florida, and the son of a millwright, and his talent for working with all things mechanical had been clear ever since he was a child. He had an interest in aircraft from an early age and earned a private pilot license in addition to all of his technical certifications. He lived in Florida with his fiancée of 15 years, his stepchild and child, but was often away from home as he worked around the world as a freelancer, usually in locations across Africa and Asia. Ben came to Nigeria with Maury Joseph and the 727 to help with its transport and to explain its systems to its new owner once the sale was fully negotiated. In April of 2003, Joseph then sent Padilla to Luanda to oversee the process of making the repairs on N844AA necessary for it to return to service. While the plane as a whole was junk at this point, it had relatively new engines which were still of value. In order to recoup some of the losses he incurred from his disastrous deal with Keith Irwin, Joseph put the engines alone up for sale. He found a buyer for them in Johannesburg, South Africa, and needed N844AA flown there so that they could be removed from the plane and the sale could be completed. In Angola, Padilla was able to make arrangements with Air Gemini, an airline based out of Luanda, to make the necessary repairs to the 727 at their repair station at Quatro Delaware Figueroa International Airport. He hired local mechanics and oversaw the work, which progressed according to plan. In May, he hired crew members, again through Air Gemini, to help him fly the newly functional plane to Johannesburg on May 26th. On May 25th, Padilla and John Matantu, a worker from the Republic of the Congo Padilla had recently hired, took the plane out of Air Gemini's hangar and onto a runway in order to run its engines as part of a systems check. It was during this check that the plane mysteriously took off and disappeared along with Ben Padilla and John Matantu. The following day, Mari Joseph was waiting for the plane in Johannesburg when he got an angry call from someone from Air Gemini, demanding to know why the plane had left Luanda ahead of schedule and without the crew that had previously been arranged for the flight. Knowing that he had not authorized any such changes, and that Ben Padilla would not have made any such changes without his permission, Joseph notified the U.S. Embassy in South Africa that a large aircraft had been stolen and called his wife back in Florida to ask her to contact the FBI. Given the fact that the plane was seemingly stolen just 20 months after 9/11, American intelligence agencies immediately took interest in the plane's disappearance. The State Department sent word to every American embassy in Africa about the plane going missing. U.S. Central Command considered sending more fighter jets to one of their joint bases in Africa. While there have been reports of the CIA and NSA looking into the case, only the FBI and State Department have had official investigations into the plane's disappearance. The FBI ended their investigation in 2005. There are, of course, a myriad of other reasons why a 727 might be stolen. To be sold on the black market, to transport goods on black market, to be disassembled for parts, and so on. Not everyone believed that the plane had actually been stolen, however. According to now retired U.S. Marine General Maston Robeson, who was the commander of U.S. forces in the Horn of Africa at the time of the plane's disappearance, the intelligence community also considered the possibility that N844AA had gone missing as part of an insurance fraud scheme. It was never clear whether it was stolen for insurance purposes by the owners or whether it was stolen with the intent to make it available to unsavory characters. He said in 2010, Mari Joseph does, at least on paper, seem like someone who might resort to fraud. He had lost a lot of money on a plane that was now largely in disrepair, and he had a history of questionable business practices. In the 1990s, Joseph had been the CEO of a cargo airline that ultimately went bankrupt. The Securities and Exchange Commission brought a civil case against him, alleging that he defrauded the airline and falsified its financial documents. Joseph had to pay a fine and was barred from acting as an officer in any publicly traded company as a result of the case. He was obviously contacted by the FBI about his plane's disappearance and volunteered to take a polygraph. The client who was set to buy the plane's engines had been with Joseph when he learned that the plane was missing and does not believe that he played a part in the disappearance because of the genuine shock and confusion he displayed at the news. Ben Padilla's family is also adamant that he would not play any part in any sort of insurance fraud. If anybody would say to me that my brother was involved with this, they're full of it, Joe Padilla, Ben's brother, said in 2010. Because I know my brother. He's not gonna do nothing crooked. I know that for a fact. Despite the fact that he was often away from his family, working outside of the United States for various private companies in what were often remote locations, Ben Padilla managed to stay in close contact with his family. The last communication they had from him was an email sent shortly before he went missing. The email was in response to one informing him that his mother had just had a heart attack. He promised to contact her as soon as he could. He never got the chance to before he went missing. According to Ben's family, someone else must have been on the plane that day and forced it to take off, as Ben would not have willingly participated in illegal activity of any kind. It would be easy to dismiss this belief held by the family as a result of their personal bias, but some of the facts surrounding the case do support the idea that Ben was forced to take off on N844AA. The fact that the plane took off at all supports the idea that an unknown person or group of people was involved in the 727's disappearance. It took 3 people, a pilot, a first officer, and a flight engineer, to operate a 727. Only 2 people, Ben Padilla and John Mutantu, are known to have been on board at the time the aircraft took off. Furthermore, Ben Padilla did have a private pilot's license, but he was not trained to operate anything even remotely close to a 727. John Mutantu had no training as a pilot whatsoever. Ben could have filled the flight engineer role, but 2 other pilots would be needed to operate the aircraft. Ben had also made the arrangements with Air Gemini to take the plane out of hangar for the system's check in advance. This means that theoretically, someone could have found out about the check and hid it on board the plane before it left the hangar with plans to take it over. The Padilla family continues to pressure the FBI to reopen the case and help them find answers about what happened to Ben. The Bureau says that this can only be done if new information is discovered. A Florida attorney began working with the family pro bono in 2004 to help facilitate their communication with the State Department and law enforcement. Almost no information is publicly available about John Mutantu, so it is unknown if he has a family who is also waiting and hoping for answers. Over the years, numerous theories have been proposed and alleged sightings of the plane have been made. It was rumored to have been stripped for parts in Brunei. There was speculation that it was a plane that crashed off the African coast on Christmas Day of 2003, and a pilot claimed to have seen it at an airport in Guinea, its tail number partially painted over. None of these reports ended up being accurate. Perhaps the most obvious explanation for why the plane has never been found is that it crashed somewhere too remote, either on land or in the ocean, for it to be located. However, even if this is the case, the mystery about why it took off in the first place still has no answer. Furthermore, there have never been any sightings of Ben Padilla and John Mutantu, and their whereabouts remain unknown. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.